June 7th, 2006, item number 149. Today's guest is Lafferty from the I Should Be Writing podcast and co-author of Tricks of the Podcasting Masters.
Podcast411.com. Listen different.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Rob, and this is the Podcast 411 podcast. Before we get into our interview with a couple quick news and notes. First off, as always, if you have any feedback, give us a call at 206-666-4357. That's 206-666-HELP. Or send audio feedback to podcast411@gmail.com. I was watching ESPN2 recently, and I saw the paintball championships being played. And it struck me that some of the guys that were playing paintball were only 20, 21 years old. The first time I played paintball was in 1984. That means these guys that are playing in the championship game weren't even alive when I first started playing paintball. I mention this because I would really like to interview a paintball podcast. So if there's anybody out there that can recommend a good paintball podcast, or if you are one of the listeners and have a paintball podcast, please send me an email to podcast411@gmail.com. Now, for those of you who put up a posting on Podcast Alley wondering if the show had pod faded, folks, 10 days without a show does not mean pod fading. I just had a son, for God's sakes. Give me a break! And speaking of which, my son is now going to be going to preschool, and my wife is going back to work, so I will be getting on a more regular basis. I'm sorry if I took the last 8 weeks to enjoy some time with my son and my wife while she was home. Today's interview is a little on the longer side, so we're going to go ahead and get into that here in a few seconds. Lafferty, as many of you may know, is host of I Should Be Writing and Geek Fu Action Grip, and also co-author with me for the book Tricks of the Podcasting Masters. This really was a co-authorship. We really did split the writing 50-50. But when it came to the editing, definitely found more mistakes on my side than I found on hers. And we're proud to say that the book is now shipping from Amazon, and you can also pick it up at Barnes & Nobles and Borders. And what I'd really appreciate is for anyone that's picked up the book to go to Amazon.com and leave a review of what you thought of the book. Let people know your thoughts on the book. Get out there if you like the book and tell everybody about it. I can tell you this much about the book. It's not a rehash of what you see on the Podcast 411 website. There's a lot of new information on this, and there's a lot of information that came from the interviews that we've done over the last year plus. But it's not the tutorials that you find on the website. I tried to make this new material, and material for those of you that feel you don't have enough listeners, this is a good book for you. Hey, if you're happy and are perfectly satisfied with the number of listeners you have, and you're making tons of money off your podcast, this isn't the book for you. But for everyone else, go check it out. We're going to go ahead now and get into the interview with Here we go. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
And I was looking back, and it's been 13 months since you were last on the show.
Really? A lot has happened.
Yes, quite a bit. I'll start you out with a different first question, and that would be, what was the first fantasy novel you ever read?
It's probably not the first one, but the first one that really made a imprint on me was Dragon Riders of Pern by Anne McCaffrey. That one was the first thing to really open my eyes to fantasy. I remember reading The Hobbit, but I don't remember liking it, and I think that's what got me to not read Lord of the Rings until I was an adult, and all of my friends were doing the peer pressure of, oh my God, you've never read Lord of the Rings? What kind of geek are you? And
that's what I was thinking, actually.
Exactly, yeah, see? I just read The Hobbit, I didn't like it, and so I thought, why would I go on and read more in this world? But Dragon Riders of Pern, probably it.
13 months later, what podcasts are you listening to now?
You know, it's funny, every time I listen to your show and you're interviewing somebody I know, and I'm thinking, they're going to mention me, and then they don't, and then I realize that now I'm going to not list all of the podcasts that I listen to, and I might be disappointing somebody else out there. Besides all the ones that I mentioned, 13 months ago, which was a lot of sci-fi stuff, I'm listening to some audiobooks right now. Seventh Son by J.C. Hutchins. I'm listening to new fiction by Cory Doctorow, his podcast, James Patrick Kelly's podcast, Free Reads. Still listening to yours, of course, Rob. I always have to get in the host ego boost.
Well, thank you. It helps on the editing.
Let's see, what else? Jonathan Colton's Thing a Week. He is my new favorite geek music artist, and I never thought anybody would take They Might Be Giants' place, but Jonathan Colton is brilliant, he's funny, and he puts out one free song a week, so you gotta like that. Actually, I think I am just really getting into a lot of fiction over podcasts, like Jared Axelrod's The Voice of Free Planet X, J.R. Blackwell's Voices of Tomorrow, and I got to put a plug in for one of my best friends, Jason Adams' Random Signal, and then, of course, my husband's podcast, The Vintage Gamer.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to do Hillary Swank there.
Yeah, that would be bad. Oh, and I started listening to Wichita Rutherford, which I feel so behind the times, but I finally picked him up. That should be enough for now.
Okay.
There are a lot more, and if I didn't mention yours, then I probably listen. There. How's that?
Now, last time I had you on, we talked about Geek Fu Action Grip. Since then, you started a new podcast.
Yes.
I Should Be Writing. Actually started it quite some time ago.
Yes, in August.
Can you tell the listeners a little bit about that podcast?
Well, I came up with the idea actually listening to Podcast 411 when you were interviewing Franklin McMahon from Media Artist Secrets. And he was talking about, creativity and what you can do with your creativity and how to use your passion for something. And it just popped into my head that I love geeky stuff, but I've been writing longer than I've been a geek, and I really wanted to do something that helped other writers. There was already Michael A. Stackpole's...
I have a quick question. Now,
okay.
Is a geek something you can become, or are you born a geek?
I really felt like I came out of the closet in late high school. I know it's definitely not...
is it a lifestyle choice, or is it something you're genetically dispositioned to?
I have no idea, but I felt a lot more confident about myself when I stopped trying to be a typical high school pretty girl and just relaxed back into my geek world.
Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead back onto...
That's fine. I'm sure geeks can be made, but for me, it felt like it was lurking there. It just hadn't come out yet. There was already a very good podcast for writer, Michael A. Stackpole's The Secrets, but Michael A. Stackpole is a best-selling author who's been writing for years and years and years. And it's always nice for us to hear from people with all that experience, but there's always this feeling of, I'll never be as cool as you. I guess you look at somebody else and you think you're already on the same level, and you're not as cool as them. You don't think about the hard work that they had to go through to get there. You think, well, if I'm not as cool as you are now, I never will be. I was here to say that you can get rejected. You can try to write for years and years and years, and even if you get rejected all that time, you can still write if it's what you want to be doing. I know so many people who say, I want to write, or I could be a writer, and then they follow it up with but. And it could be, but I have a family, but I have a day job, but I got tired of the rejection slips. And I think all of those excuses are crap. And that's pretty much what I talk about. And I'm not...
How about, but I can't put together a coherent sentence?
Well, you could even start working on that. Just get a grammar book and start studying the language of your natural speaking and start going from there. You always got to start somewhere. If you really think that you have good ideas and you can write, then the sentence structure is going to have to come at some point.
Or you get a co-author that helps you out with those things. We'll talk more about that later in the interview.
Okay. But, so the podcast is just about, hi, I'm a struggling fiction writer, and I'm trying to encourage other struggling fiction writers to either not quit or to pick up the pen again. It's been very well received.
You have a lot of feedback on your show.
Yes.
What has been some of your favorite feedback?
I got a fan letter from James Patrick Kelly. James Patrick Kelly is a fantasy sci-fi author who is well known in the genre, who has won multiple awards, who's been nominated for multiple awards.
Who was a guest on your show also.
Yes, he was a guest on my show, but I got a fan letter from him, which, basically had me running around the house gibbering. It was just phenomenal. It was so amazing. That was probably the one that really got me.
So I take it that's how you got him to be a guest on the show.
Yes. After we chatted a little bit, I invited him onto the show. And beyond that, I've heard a lot of people say, Dear Mur, I just sent out my first story because of you. I sent out my first submission, and Dear Mur, I haven't written since college 10 years ago, and I just started writing again, and it feels so good. You have these hopes of what your podcast will do, but when it actually exceeds everything you'd ever hoped for. I think maybe I could have helped somebody. I didn't know, but the fact that it's actually working out better than I ever thought it would was just blows my mind every time I get one of those emails. It nearly makes me cry.
So you're helping people get rejected.
I am. Rejection is a badge of pride, dude. It's a battle scar. It shows that you've been somewhere, you got knocked down, and you got back up.
One of the things that you mentioned in one of the episodes that I loved was that quote of someone else who had said that you should have a frog for breakfast. And this is in the area of multitasking.
Yes.
What that basically was that you have to do the hardest task in the morning, the first thing you do. So when I get up in the morning, the first thing I shouldn't do is get online and play poker. I should do the hardest thing.
Should probably change your son's diaper.
Yeah. So what's your frog? What is the frog that you're having for breakfast lately?
Well, today it was finish up my podcast, because I went to a convention this past weekend, and although I like for both podcasts to be weekly, sometimes I slip, and I was late on both of them, and I tried to take all day yesterday to record and edit 3 podcasts because I had a special I Should Be Writing coming up because I had an interview with Neil Gaiman I wanted to post, but that was aside from my normal show. So I wanted to post the interview, post an I Should Be Writing, and post a Geek Fu, and I got everything recorded yesterday, but I didn't get a chance to edit it all. Today was editing and posting.
I saw that you got Heaven Part 6 up.
Yes.
And that, for the people that don't know, that's under the Geek Fu Action Grip feed. Can you talk a little bit about the Heaven, I guess it's a series that you're running right now?
Right. It's serialized fiction. I actually thought back maybe 14, 15 months ago that, before the really cool audio dramas came out, like Spaceship Radio and The Falcon Banner, that I would like to do some audio dramas. And then I realized that I didn't have any experience in writing audio dramas, number one, and number two, I didn't have the equipment to set up voices and get sound effects and all that. I didn't know the first thing about it. But I had the idea for the plot, and that was people wandering around different afterlives and having adventures. And so then I just decided all the essays for Geek Fu and Michael and Evo's Winging It and the stuff I started to write for magazines, it all started to kind of meld together in my mind, and I started to worry I was repeating myself. So I decided to step back and do some fiction on the site. And so that serialized stuff came up. So the story is about a woman and a man who are a couple of years out of college. They're best friends and roommates, and they get into a car wreck in the first episode and go to heaven. They go to the Christian heaven, and through various reasons become dissatisfied with it. Then they just start wandering, and there are lots of roads in heaven, and they all lead to different places. And so they're just basically traveling the afterlife right now.
Episode 6 went up today,
yes,
and we're doing this interview on June 2nd.
Uh-huh.
So how far along in the series, how many episodes are you planning on this series running?
I have 24 loose plot lines in my head. And that's sort of like an overlying arc of where I want them to go. I don't know like what heaven they're going to visit next, but I know what needs to happen in the larger story for the next 18 episodes. I had a talk with Evo from Podiobooks.com, and we talked about how Evo likes to put completed works up there, and since this is serialized, it's not completed. But I would like it to be on Podiobooks.com eventually, and so we agreed to set it up into seasons. So season 1 will be 12 episodes, and I know how it's going to end. Season 1 is going to end, and I know where they're going to start going in season 2. So I pretty much have those things kind of mapped out. I have nothing written ahead of time. I'm like breaking all my own fiction rules in the fact that I write it in a hurry, give it a read over, and then put it up. I mean, I'm not like doing that, write the story and then let it sit and then look at it with fresh eyes and then edit it. I'm like just half. But it's not half-assed because it's really, I'm having a lot of fun with it, and really, I'm getting a lot of good feedback from it. And that's really helping me out with further episodes.
Now, before we talked about Heaven, you mentioned that you were at a con this past weekend, and obviously that was Balticon. How did Balticon go?
Balticon was a blast. It was exhausting. I don't think I've never been that involved with a con. Usually they throw me on a gaming panel or perhaps a feminist panel, but this time it was podcasting. And we had a lot of good feedback. They didn't have a lot of breaks between the panels, so it's like one panel would end and the other one would begin. So I'm waiting outside the room where I was going to be speaking, and there's a father and a mother and 2 teenage kids, like younger teens maybe, I can't tell. It's like 10, 11, 14, I don't know. Definitely not old enough to drive, but definitely older than, 8. And the father and the son come up to me, and they're like, Murr, can we get a picture with you? We love your stuff. And
Oh, that had to feel just wonderful.
oh, it was fantastic, but it was really funny because it's like, this was the best free sci-fi you're not listening to panel, and that was one of the most packed ones I was at. I believe the beginning podcasting panel was also packed, but I wasn't on that panel. But they were sitting in the front, and, we'd talk about Escape Pod, and we'd talk about the Shawnee, and these kids were just like, yeah, we love that one. And then when they mentioned Michael and Evo's Winging It. And Michael and Evo's Winging It, for those of you who don't know, it's a geek podcast where Michael and Evo sit around and drink, no holds barred, and it's not for kids. And it's like the kids are just like, woo, we love Winging It! And I'm like, oh God, we're corrupting the youth! But it was so funny because it was like the perfect geek family. You got the mother and the father and the two kids, a boy and a girl, sitting in the front row, hanging on every word about podcasting and SF. It was beautiful, really. I was so thrilled, except when they were so excited about Winging It.
Were most people there, they knew what podcasting was?
Yeah, it was surprising. One guy in the back, halfway through the sci-fi podcast panel, who needed explaining, but overall, there were a lot of people who wanted to learn how to do it, but most everybody knew what it was.
At Balticon, you had an opportunity to hand out our book. And we
Yes,
haven't
I
talked
did.
about that yet. Other than my earlier mention about getting a co-author to help you with your broken sentence structure, and that would be my broken sentence structure, and you to help me out. And I do have to apologize publicly for all my overuse of capitalization that I so engorged in the marketing world that I overcapitalized like every word, and I do apologize.
It's okay. It's fine. Your sentence structure was fine. It was the capitalizations that was incorrect, but the sentence structure, that was fine.
Of all those typos that I sent over to you, which one of them was the most humorous one that you found of mine?
I believe it was the Reese's Monkey.
Oh, yeah.
Because you spelled it like the peanut butter cup. Still, again, it's a common mistake. Or, I don't write about Reese's Monkeys very often, but I assume it's a common mistake.
Yeah, I remember when the corrections would come back, and I would see the corrections you'd make, and I'd just start laughing, going, oh, my God. Poor Murr. I noticed on Amazon that we're now ahead of My Little Pony Mystery Monster. So that made me feel good.
We really should not be watching the Amazon rankings obsessively, because I don't even understand how they work, and how they can fluctuate from, 46,000 one day to 500,000 the next, and... But, the people at the con who got copies of the book seemed to be really enjoyed it. The one really funny thing that was said was, they said it's definitely the prettiest book out there. It's like a nice shade of blue, and because T. Morris, the co-author of Podcasting for Dummies, was there, everyone kept saying it's much better than, anything yellow and black standing out, but...
Or the contrasting colors of Podcast Solutions, which,
yes.
If anybody has any fashion sense, you just know those two colors don't go together.
Yeah, people seem to like it, and the people who got the book have been emailing me since the con to comment on it. I got one person saying a Q Potter that we left out that should have been in there, and somebody else saying that a couple of the chapters were really useful. So personally, to me, it's being well received. So that's a happy thing.
My biggest concern when I was writing this book, as I told you many times, was just as long as Steve Ely liked it, I was going to be happy. So I'm waiting to hear what Steve has to say.
He has his copy now.
Let's get back to I Should Be Writing here for a second.
Okay.
And you've done quite a few interviews. Mark Jeffrey, T. Morris, and T is always fun to interview.
Oh, yes.
Because T will run you off on tangents if you don't watch it.
Oh, I didn't watch it. I had to cut that interview in half.
Yeah. T's was one of the longest ones I ever did because we got, I think, about an hour and 20 minutes into the interview I was doing with T.
Wow.
And it was like, hey, wait, we haven't talked about your podcast yet, T. Because T had taken us on such tangents.
Love you, T.
Yes. But T, anybody that's going to interview T, just a warning, put 3 times aside the amount of time you normally would for editing because you'll need it. But he's a great guest to have. You also had Tracy Hickman and Neil Gaiman, who you co-interviewed at Balticon.
Yes, he was a very busy man, so Paul and I squashed our interviews together.
Is there a dream guest, someone that you haven't gotten on that you just like, okay, here's my white rhino, my white buffalo that I'd love to get on the show?
Well, I had Neil Gaiman. Honestly, probably somebody like James Patrick Kelly who has not only been successful, but who has taught. And so that would be any of the big people who teach at the big-time workshops, like Connie Willis or Teresa and Patrick Nielsen Hayden from Tor. Cory Doctorow would be wonderful, but I call him the perpetual motion machine because I don't know anybody in this world, and that includes world leaders, who are busier than Cory.
Well, I would like to have Cory on the show, too. So
maybe we should do a double interview there. No, but any of the writers who teach and write, I think that would be the best fit for the show. But I only do one interview a month. My format is I do 3 podcasts, and since I don't make any lies, I am an unpublished, I've had 2 short stories published. I am a little published fiction author giving advice to other non-published or little published fiction authors, and I know that I could be making mistakes. So my point is I have 3 shows, and then I take the main topics of those 3 shows and I make an interview about it, and then the 4th show I interview a published author about those issues. So, they can correct me or whatever. And actually that happened the first time when I interviewed Michael A. Stackpole, because he was listening. He had been listening to the show and he already had some comments on what I'd been saying, which was awesome. It really helped out. So it's kind of hard. Sometimes I'll get 2 people saying they want to be interviewed right after I did an interview, so that's scheduling way, way in the future for me. And I think I maybe would like to do more interviews, but for now they would have to be like the Neil Gaiman interview was just up, which is like a very short intro, a very short outro, and nothing special involved, because I don't think I could handle doing more interviews and keeping the show the way it is.
Let's not forget to tell people where to find I Should Be Writing.
Okay, that would be ishouldbewriting.com.
See, that's so easy. You're going to a lot of cons to help on the promotion side. What other cons do you have coming up here in the near future?
At the end of this month, beginning of July, I will be at Origins, which is a gaming convention in Columbus, Ohio. At the end of July, I'll be at Trinicon/Deep South Con. I'm not really sure what they're going to be calling it, but that's what it is, in Raleigh. Actually, Gene Wolfe and John Kessel and James Patrick Kelly will be there, so I'm very much looking forward to that con. And then after that is Dragon Con. So that's it. 2 trips and 1 local.
Now, one of the advices that you give in I Should Be Writing is don't quit your day job.
Yes.
And what are you doing as far as generating revenue for your podcast? And are you quitting your day job yet?
Well, I don't have a day job. 5 years ago, I got laid off from my job and started working as a freelance writer. And then I became a stay-at-home mom. So right now my daughter goes to preschool 2 days a week, and I use those days to do more magazine writing and podcasting. I received not livable money, but I received a surprising amount of donations last year, which I very much appreciated, helped me upgrade my equipment. I had Lulu, print-on-demand company that's not evil, do a sponsorship with me for 2 months this past year. That was really great.
How did you get the Lulu deal?
I approached them. I told them a little bit about my podcast and said, I have a lot of listeners who may be interested in self-publishing their stuff, and you are a good self-publisher. So do you want to get together and talk? And they did. And so we had 2 good months of sponsorship. It was a very positive experience.
I understand you have an announcement you want to make?
Yes, I have been in talks with Steve Ely from Escape Pod for quite some time now, and we're ready to announce it, which is we are going to be publishing a new podcast magazine, and I will be co-editor along with Ben Phillips, and it will be a horror podcast called Pseudopod. It's going to be just like Escape Pod, only horror. So it's going to be a podcast magazine, donation supported. And we're going to have other podcasters read the stories, and I'm really excited about this. So
where will this be located at?
I believe we got pseudopod.org, but okay. I don't know if there's anything there yet.
Okay.
You should look for it in the next couple of months. We're ready to announce there's not a lot there yet.
So if someone has some horror that they want to contribute, I would imagine it'd be the same as Steve would used for the submission process for Escape Pod.
Exactly. It's a submission process. We buy audio reprint rights. We podcast it, and we're paying market. If you want to know, if you're not familiar with Escape Pod and you want to know about Pseudopod, then go to Escape Pod, and everywhere you see sci-fi and fantasy, just substitute horror, and it's going to be pretty much the same thing.
Well, that sounds like a cool idea, and I wish you guys lots of luck, and definitely when it launches, I will mention it again on the show.
Thank you.
And I'll be subscribing, too.
I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
So last question, and as always, it's what advice would you like to offer to podcasters? Now, other than the obvious, which is go out and get a copy of Tricks of the Podcasting Masters, but what other advice would you like to offer?
There's so many. Don't have expectations of Leo Laporte's numbers the first week out. I believe Dave Slusher said it best that I would rather have 250 rabid, attentive listeners than 200,000 who really didn't care but still subscribed. If you can get a handful of people who love your stuff and who keep begging you for more, begging you for longer podcasts, then you have something there. You have something worthwhile. I know people who've started and they get 100 listeners and then they get depressed and then they quit.
I know other people that do cartwheels when they get 100 listeners.
Exactly. The numbers, that's not why we're doing it. The hope for sponsorship or whatever is not why we're doing it. Those are all nice, but I mean, think about it as a hobby because, say, model trains are a hobby, and when you start doing model trains, people don't ask you, so how are you going to make money doing this? Or how many people have come into your basement to look at your model trains? You really just, it's a hobby, and you do it because you love it. And if other people catch on the fact that you love it, that's great. But really, if you want to do it, then do it, and don't worry about your numbers. Because if you're passionate and you're good, then they'll come.
Well, Mer, thank you for coming back on the show, and thank you for working with me on the book. I had a great time working with you on the book, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was, Rob. Thanks for having me on the show again.
Well, folks, that concludes our interview with Mer Lafferty from the I Should Be Writing podcast at ishouldbewriting.com. Please check out her podcast. And if you haven't done so already, please check out her other podcast, Geek Fu Action Grip, at geekfuactiongrip.com. Thanks again, Mer, for coming on the show. During the interview and before the interview, I talked a little bit about the book that we both wrote, Tricks of the Podcasting Masters. And here is the first review that someone sent in to me about the book. Here we go.
Hey, Rob, it's Steve Stanger from the Mac Attack podcast. Well, this morning in the mail came my pre-ordered Tricks of the Podcasting Masters book. And doing some work home today, or I should say doing some work from home today in my home office, I said, you know what, I'll sit down, read the introduction, and then put the book on the side and read it later. Well, that was about 147 pages ago. What a great book. Kept me from getting any work done so far today. Great book. You and Mer did an awesome job. Like I said, I'm only about halfway through with that. Have a legal-size pad next to me, almost full of notes and websites to check out, and parts of the book I want to go back and look at. So I just wanted to call, keep up the good work with Podcast 411. I really dug the last interview, the whole Battlestar Galactica thing. And great book. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Steve, thank you for that very kind and generous review. Coming up at the end of today's podcast, we'll have a promo from the Catholic Family Podcast, so please stick around for that. For those of you in the Kansas City area, it's that time of the month for the Kansas City Podcasters Meetup. This Saturday, June 10th, 4 to 6 p.m. at Johnny's in Overland Park. Hope to see you all there. And as I mentioned a couple of shows ago, I will be hosting a panel at the Podcasting Corporate Summit in San Francisco on June 20th and 21st. For those of you in the area that plan on attending or flying in to attend, I look forward to seeing you at the Corporate Podcasting Summit in San Francisco. I'll have links in the show notes along with a coupon code to save you some money on admission to the summit. If you have any feedback you'd like to share with myself or the audience, please give me a call at 206-666-4357 or send feedback to podcast411@gmail.com. Well, that's going to go ahead and do it for us today. As always, I'm your host, Rob, from Podcast 411, reminding you to listen different.
On the Catholic Family Podcast, you'll hear stimulating intellectual conversation, interviews with famous people.
See, my sister, she had a baby, and me and my wife took it in because she passed away, and it lost all its legs and its arms, and it lived, and it's fairly happy. True story.
Proper etiquette.
Connecticut?
No, etiquette.
Quiet, Maurice.
Can you not see you have insulted the freak?
The finer points of religious instruction,
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph.
and expert parenting advice.
David, where's my roll of duct tape?
We've been ratted out, boys.
So tune into the Catholic Family Podcast each week at CatholicFamilyPodcast.com.
Catholic Family Podcast.com. Okay, you can do it now.